Hi, and welcome back to the Power BI Custom Visuals course. In this module, we're going to be looking at the Mekko or Mekko chart. The Mekko chart is kind of similar to the tree map in at least how it appears, but it's allowing you to capture two dimensions in a single chart. So basically the idea here, for example, you can see in the visual on the right-hand side that it gives us the ability to see a revenue by manufacturer and by sale type all in a single visual here very nicely. So with a Mekko chart, you can quickly spot large segments and identify white space, and it's very easy to do here in this type of visual. It's almost like a mixture between a 100% stacked column chart and a 100% stacked bar chart in a single visual. So if you want to kind of go from some of the visuals you might already be familiar with, that's what it's a combination of. Now the width of the column is proportional to the total values of the column as well. So you're going to see that as we start to do our example here, that it actually is the width is not always proportional, or it's not always similar to the column that might be right next to it, because it is dependent on the values that you have inside of the data set. Now this one's going to be developed by Microsoft, but let's go ahead and take a look at where you can go download it and then how you can actually use it in an example. Alright, so we're going to start by going to the Visuals Gallery. If you go to visuals.powerbi.com, that will take you to where I am right now. And you're going to scroll down until you find the Mekko or Mekko chart. And it is actually right here. So you'll select the Mekko chart and then tell it that you want to go ahead and download the visual here. You can also download some samples if you'd like to take a look at how others have used it as well. Alright, so once you download that, you're going to go ahead and go over to the Power BI desktop, which I already have open and ready to go. And we're going to start by going ahead to bring in some data. The data that we're looking at here is going to be sales by country, and then we're going to also look at it by category of our product. And so we're looking at two dimensions in our data, and we'd like to be able to visualize it on a single graph, and that's where the Mekko chart comes into play and is handy. Alright, so to do that, we're going to start by going to get our data. You'll go up to the Get Data section up at the top, and you're going to select that you want to get data from Excel, and then hit Connect. And then we're going to bring in data from this country sales spreadsheet, which you'll have available to you as well. So I'll hit Open on that, and then we're going to connect to that Excel workbook and tell it that we want to bring in data from the spreadsheet called by category, and then I'll select Load. That'll bring this data now into our data model, and then we can also import the custom visual by going over to the Visualizations pane here and selecting Import from File and select Import a Custom Visual. We'll go ahead and select that we want to, go ahead and import this, and then go find the data that we're going to be using for this example. The custom visual that we're going to be using for this example, which is right here where I've downloaded it just a few moments ago. So if you want, you'll probably want to go find a standard location where you download all the visuals. You can see I have several downloaded here. This time I'm going to select the Mekko chart and hit Open. Alright, that's successfully imported the custom visual for me, so I'll hit OK. And then I can import and bring the visual in here. Now one thing I recommend usually whenever you're testing out some of these visuals is to go ahead and bring this data in as a regular table so you can take a look at what it looks like and you know what you're getting yourself into as we start to work with this data set. So I'm going to bring this in here as a regular old table, and that way we have an idea of what the data looks like. And the other thing this will benefit us with is showing and testing out the cross-filtering that exists in this visual. Alright, so I'm going to go back and select the Mekko chart again, and we're going to go ahead and bring in some data by going ahead and dragging in the category underneath the category section. So we'll go ahead and bring that in. And then we'll bring in underneath the series section, we'll bring in the country. And then for the y-axis, we'll bring in quantity, and we'll do the same for the axis width. That's the width of each of the columns that we see here. We're going to bring in quantity for that as well. So that'll give us a depiction of the total quantity sold. And as you can see here, by looking at the tooltip, the numbers indicate that the 7,000 is more than that we have underneath bikes and clothing. So that is representative of the amount of values that we have in that section, in the accessories. Alright, you can also see here that as we look at the Mekko chart, it is interactive and does cross-filter with any other item that we have. So I could select things like all United States accessories here, and you'll notice that it also filters and cross-filters to what we see in the table here as well. So that applies as I select other items. It also filters down anything that you have in a table or anything else in the chart for that matter. Now, if you had more than one measure, you certainly could bring that in. You notice I brought quantity in here twice, both underneath the y-axis section here and also the axis width. You could have had two metrics that you brought in to be able to visualize them differently here. In this case, I just had the single metric that I visualized. That's pretty much it for the simple nature of the Mekko chart, but let's go ahead and show you what you can do to actually enhance the visual in the Format Paintbrush section. So we'll go underneath the Format section, and we'll talk about what we have here. So underneath the Format section, you can actually increase the border. There is a slight border between each of the columns that you see here, so you can turn it off if you don't want to see that border. Or you can actually go underneath the border section and change the color of it, or you can increase the size of it if you wanted to. So you can see I increased the size of the border. I don't really want to do that permanently. I just want to show you what that does. So I'm going to undo that by doing Control Z. Underneath the data label section, you can turn on data labels, which I think it makes sense to do here. And you can also go under the data label section and change things like the display units or the color of the display. So right now it's showing here the display as a %. But if you change the display units and change it to really anything outside of auto, it'll actually show the true value for that cross section of the Mekko chart. So for United States accessories, we can see that it's showing that value there because we decided to change the display units outside of none. So as soon as you change it off auto, it actually shows it as the true values. We're going to leave it as auto because that's really how you traditionally will see the Mekko chart, is with a percentage value there. You can also adjust the legend. So if I go down to the legend section here, that's actually pertaining to this area right up top. If I turn off the legend, it goes away altogether, but you probably want that legend on, so I'm going to leave it on. But underneath the legend section, you can change the text of the legend. So if you don't want it to say country, you want it to say something else, you can modify that here. You can also increase the size of the legend, so I can bump up the text size there a little bit to make it a little easier to read. Then next, underneath the x-axis, we'll keep going down a little bit more. Underneath the x-axis, you can turn that off, and it'll actually turn off the labels that you have here on the bottom. Probably makes sense to include those, so I'll leave those on. And then you can also increase the text size of those, just like we did a few moments ago. I can bump up the text size, so it's a little easier to read that. If you want to change the color of that text, you can certainly come underneath here and change it from black to something else. I think black is fine for this example, so I'll leave that alone. And then you can also turn off the titles altogether. If you you can turn on the title, which just tells you what are the values that you're seeing here. Well, they're different categories of the data that we have. So if you wanted to, you can leave that off. It's off by default. I think it probably makes sense to leave it off here. All right, next we'll go down a little bit more. We'll find the y-axis. You can, of course, turn the y-axis off if you want, so you don't see the percentages there. That might be something you may want to consider doing because you see the percentages here anyways. But the nice thing about having the percentages on is that you can kind of see here, if I look at this one, I can say that these 4 or 5 categories below make up about 60% of my data that I have inside of accessories. So you can kind of make an estimate based on looking at a section of the values and say that makes up about 40%, or this makes up about 50%. So you can do that if you leave the labels on. It makes it a little easier to see that. You can also bump up the text size here some if you want. So if you want to see those labels a little easier, you can bump that up so it makes it a little easier to see. You can also turn on the titles here on the right-hand side, and it just tells you that's a percentage of the quantity. I'm going to leave that off, though. I don't really need the title of the axes in this example. Now, you might notice that the colors that are being used here were turned on by default. If you want to adjust those colors, if you don't like this baby blue, for example, you can go underneath the data color section here, and you can change the data colors that are being used. So instead of using the United States as the baby blue, I can change it to something like, let's say, purple. And you can adjust that here to really any color that you want inside of the data colors section. All right, next you'll find that really the rest of these are really just kind of standard properties that you have available in every one of the data visualizations you use, like adding a title up at the top or adjusting the title. You can add a background color, you can lock the aspect ratio. Those are all kind of standard things that are available in just about every visual that you use. Now you might also play around, if I go back to the fields list, you can play around with the order that these are being placed in here. Right now I have the category column underneath category, but I could have switched these around if I wanted to. I could actually place the category, or the country I should say, up here, and I can move the category down here if you want to visualize it slightly differently. It's just another way to be able to visualize it, but now you can see I have more of the columns than I had previously, but this might be a better way to visualize it because now I can see United States makes up this width that we see here, and it's also making up about 61% of the accessory sales that I have, or 61% of the United States sales that I have are coming from the accessories section. So it's just another interesting way that you can kind of move and shift around the data that you have. I'm going to bump it back to how we had it just a moment ago, but just an interesting way to be able to show you how you can adjust the way that you can visualize the data in the Mekko chart. Hope you guys enjoyed this visual. Look forward to showing you our next one, and stay tuned for our next custom visual. Thanks a lot.